So today I'm talking about the Amazon Prime show Invincible and the incredible Omni Man versus Guardians of the Globe betrayal scene.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention?
This video is sponsored by Human 2.0, your trusted source for online training in bodyweight exercise, kettlebells, animal flow, primal movement, and injury prevention. If you're interested in any of those things, then check them out here on YouTube. If you're looking for awesome live workouts, then sign up for their live workout sessions with the link in the description. The first 50 people that sign up with the code GRAYSON will get 20% off their sign-up price. Hey interns, I'm Dr. Chris Raynor and I am not your everyday ortho. I teach you about injuries, orthopedic surgery, and medical topics in a way that's easy to understand and entertaining. Today for orthopedic rounds, I'm gonna look at the betrayal scene from the Amazon show Invincible, where Omni Man battles the members of the Guardians of the Globe. This was certainly an unexpected and shocking scene when I first saw it. If you are a fan of the show, then let me know what you thought about this scene in the comments. Be sure to stick around to the end of the video to see what was the most interesting part of the scene for me. If you want some of my short form content, I am on TikTok, where you can follow me and ask me anything. That being said, let's get right to it. Spinjury alert! That's combined injury and spoiler alert, in case you were wondering. This video will contain some simulated graphic footage of injuries and a discussion of what happens. If you're squeamish or you haven't watched this episode, you can skip ahead to the discussion. You have been warned. Red Rush. Boom, like a water balloon. Oh. In their short fight, Omni Man grabs Red Rush by the head and squeezes while holding Red Rush suspended in the air. Initially, we see Red Rush's glasses break and some epistaxis, or bleeding from the nose. Then, we can see Red's mandible, or lower jaw, dislocate and his right eyeball begin to bulge out of the skull. Eventually, the compressive force is too great and Omni Man crushes Red's skull with all of its contents being ejected into the air. Now, yes, I do get it that this is a cartoon and that we're talking about fictional characters. But let's suspend our disbelief for the duration of this video and look more closely at the injuries. First, I think that it is conceivable that with the increased intracranial pressure that would come from this kind of compression, you would get some bleeding from the nose and even potentially an eyeball bulging out of the skull in that fashion. You could also probably squeeze the skull tightly enough that the jaw would become disarticulated or dislocated as it was shown here. You could certainly get the skull to pop like a balloon if the compression was great enough. However, as the skull is quite rigid, the margin between being crushed and exploding would be quite narrow. Failure would come quickly, and I am not certain that there would be as much time between nosebleed, eye popping, disarticulation, and balloon popping. To be honest, I'm not sure why Red Rush didn't just kick him between the legs. Like repeatedly. Darkwing. Boom. Ah. Woo. That'll do it. You can't come back from that. Omni Man grabs Darkwing by the ankle as he descends from the heights and swings him around through the air, smashing his face into the floor twice. The first time we can hear Darkwing moaning, so we know that he is still conscious, despite the extensive spattering of blood on the floor. However, when he swings him around a second time, there can be no doubt of the outcome, as Darkwing's skull explodes into a 10-foot long spatter of blood and brains on the floor. Initially, we would expect Darkwing to have suffered a facial fracture of sorts. Given the force involved, I would expect a Lefort 3 fracture, where the face has basically become separate from the skull. This is a fracture pattern that involves bilateral fracture lines through the maxilla, the zygomatic arches, the orbitals, and the nasal bridge. Not pretty. Not at all pretty. Omni Man finishes Darkwing by doubling down on his leg whip, causing Darkwing's skull to explode in brutal fashion. To be honest, I think that this is way more blood than what we would expect to see in the skull, as most of the space in the skull is occupied by the brain and cerebrospinal fluid. But with enough force, I do think you might be able to splatter someone in this fashion.
What'd you say?
Of course, if you swing them hard enough, you just might pull off their leg, but you would have to swing them really, really quickly and rather suddenly. Having said that, we can see that Darkwing's skeleton did not appreciate being swung around like a bag of groceries, as we see Darkwing's body momentarily laying on the ground in a grossly, and I do mean grossly, contorted position. Green Ghost. Yeah, that was over quickly. The Green Ghost battle with Omni Man was not even a battle. 1 second she is catching Darkwing's body in her arms. The next second her head becomes a bracelet for Omni Man after he punches her squarely in the face. Correction. Through the face, through the brain, and out the back of the skull. This is an interesting injury because the size of Omni Man's fist relative to the size of Green Ghost's face is quite comparable. In order to cause this sort of penetrating injury, the speed and the power of impact would be quite high. With such a high energy of impact exerted over such a large area relative to the area of the face, it is not certain whether Omni Man would punch through Green Ghost's face or whether instead he would just knock her freaking head clean off her shoulders. Aquarius. Boom. Fish chatter, anyone? This fish-headed superhero is the next one to get it, as his skull is unceremoniously bashed in by Warhammer's mace. His head is practically pulverized, as it is struck by Omni-Man's powerful swing. Now, being that Aquarius is a fish-like humanoid, it is difficult to say whether his anatomy is more human-like or more fish-like. But if we assume that the anatomy of his skull is similar to that of earthborn fishes, we can speculate that the bones that make up his skull are similar in form and function. Consequently, we might expect Aquarius' skull to be less rigid than the skull of a terrestrial animal or human, making it more susceptible to this kind of damage. Either way, we can see that it only takes one swing of the mace to turn Aquarius' skull into an unrecognizable mess.
Sidebar.
Omni Man is clearly quite lethal in his battle with the Guardians in this scene. Of particular note is that the first 3 Guardians were all dispatched with attacks involving the head. Note to self. If I am ever fighting a superhero, attack the head. Quickest path to victory. End sidebar. Martian Man. That was easy. To be honest, I'm not even sure how Omni Man dispatched Martian Man here. In their battle, Martian Man restrains Omni Man by encircling him several times. In his simplest dispatch yet, Omni Man simply peels off part of Martian Man's anatomy to finish him off. Despite the fact that Martian Man's powers include elasticity, superhuman strength, superhuman durability, and regeneration, all Omni Man had to do was rip off a pound of flesh and Martian Man was done.
What?
If you know what part of Martian Man this was, then let me know in the comments. War Woman. Yeah, that doesn't work that way. Not at all. Omni Man grabs War Woman's head from out of the air and spins it around 180 degrees to the rear. Like, that's backwards. Unfortunately, this is not compatible with life, as this type of injury mechanism would involve occlusion of critical structures in the neck, including the trachea and the esophagus. It would also cause disruption of and possibly transection of the blood vessels of the neck, including the carotid arteries, the vertebral arteries, and the jugular veins. Furthermore, this would result in fractures or dislocations of the cervical spine, and if at a high enough level, quite possibly even an atlanto-occipital dissociation, which is basically an internal decapitation. Obviously, if the vertebrae and the ligaments of the spinal column are damaged, then the spinal cord itself is going to have issues. We can see the effect of this with the instantaneous paralysis of War Woman before she falls to the ground and expires. The worst part about this is that War Woman would have a short time to think about what had happened before the lights went out for the last time. The Immortal. Why? Ugh. Boom! Sharper than a Ginsu.
It's as simple as that.
Having already mortally wounded the Immortal earlier in the fight, like isn't that an oxymoron? With a gut punch that literally punched out his abdominal contents, Omni Man returns to the last of the Guardians to finish him off. Without a second thought, or even a word for that matter, Omni Man decapitates the Immortal with a kung fu chop to the side of the neck. Clearly, this involves transection of all the structures mentioned with War Woman. But rather than an internal decapitation, this is an actual decapitation that leaves the Immortal's head bouncing across the floor. Not much to add here, other than that Omni Man is 6 for 7 in terms of dispatching the Guardians with head attacks. And if the Martian Man body part that was ripped off, ending in his demise, was from the Martian's head, then Omni Man would be 7 for 7 for head attacks. You might even say that this is one of Omni Man's superpowers.
Particularly lethal with curious ways to dispatch opponents using structures above the shoulders.
That's money, dude.
If you were wondering, the part of the scene where Omni Man dispatched Martian Man was particularly interesting for me. I am not sure what he peeled off, but it was especially effective and made his interaction with Martian Man the easiest of the 7 dispatches. On a side note, I am personally loving this show. When I found out that it was based on an Image comic book, it made me want to start collecting comic books again. If you haven't checked it out, give it a watch on Amazon Prime. Be sure to let me know in the comments whether you watched this show, and if so, what was your favorite part of this scene. Otherwise, if you liked the video and you want to see another one, then let me know that too down below. Thanks for watching. I will see you for rounds next week. And as always, that's been a word from Dr. Chris, not your everyday ortho.
Just a flesh wound.